And I would note that the government put on their website a statement that they would be proceeding with a tripartite process. And they held, as far as we know, one consultation that never publicly reported its findings and never proceeded any further. Mr. Speaker, this is unfortunate. The government held no prior consultation with healthcare workers who are the focus of this bill. And astoundingly, they had no advance consultation with either opposition party to share the government's concerns, report the government's plans, or to ask advice. Therefore, this bill can only be understood as a political tactic and not a serious attempt to improve the laws of Nova Scotia.
Order, please. We have arrived at the moment of interruption. The adjournment debate has been chosen and announced earlier and won by the honourable member from Kings West. The resolution this evening, therefore, to be resolved that the Nova Scotia government immediately address safety and road conditions concerns related to the state of Route 4 in Richmond County and Cape Breton County. The Honourable, the member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's unfortunate that in 2007 that I still have to stand in my place and talk about the deplorable state of Route 4, specifically Route 4 from the St. Peter's Canal down to Sydney River, where it meets the Highway 125. Mr. Speaker, this is an issue which I have been raising in this House since I've been elected, and trying to get the government to commit to a long-term plan and a long-term vision as to where we are going with Route 4. Mr. Speaker, over the years we have seen a number of meetings which have taken place down in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, which has been lobbying for this road to get the attention it deserves. And certainly I want to take the opportunity to commend Warden John Boudreau of the Municipality of Richmond and the councillors who they themselves have been lobbying for quite some time and quite some years through letters to the Minister of Transportation provincially, and even to letters to the Federal Minister of Transport, asking that it be considered part of the Federal Highway Strategy and therefore eligible for funds under that program, which has apparently been a difficult task over the years. Mr. Speaker, the reason why it's very timely to speak about this issue again is the fact that yesterday a meeting was held in Cape Breton between the Cape Breton Sydney and Area Chamber of Commerce, the Strait Area Chamber of Commerce, municipal leaders, business leaders, and concerned citizens who are very upset about the state of Route 4 and the fact that it's still unclear as to where the government plans on taking renovations and upgrades to this road into the future. And let me say, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I realize that there has been some significant investments which have been made along Route number 4 over the last few years, and I know the former Minister of Transportation was committed to seeing some improvements to that route, and I'm certainly hoping that the current Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal will show that commitment as well. One of the problems with that, though, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that each year we wait to see what work is going to take place. There's no way for me as the MLA for Richmond, for which Route 4 goes through a significant part of my constituency, to be able to tell my municipal council or to be able to tell the people of Richmond, here is what work you should expect to take place on Route 4 for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years. As I stand here today, Mr. Speaker, I have no idea what work the government has planned for Route number 4 for the construction year 2008. And that is where I am hoping that the Minister of Transportation will be able to give us, to all members of this House, but certainly the members from Cape Breton and myself having the highway go right through my riding, give us a sense of exactly what work should we expect on which sections and when should we expect that work to take place. Mr. Speaker, as part of the frustration that was expressed yesterday, the end result was that both the two chambers of commerce and those who were there put a demand to the government that the upgrades to Route 4 take place within the next 5 years, and they set the date of 2012 as to when they'd like to see Route 4 from the St. Peter's Canal to Sydney River completely upgraded from one end to the next. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if that's realistic. Hopefully, the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal will be able to address that issue and give us a sense. Can it be done within 5 years? Is it going to take him a little bit longer? And can he at least give us a vision or some sort of a time frame where I can go back and tell the people of Richmond County and tell the Municipal Council and tell the businesses that here is what work is going to take place, here is when it will take place, and which specific sections are going to be done. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that the people of Cape Breton have always proven to be a most reasonable people. But not knowing from one year to the next what is going to take place, not even having an assurance that any work will take place, is what's leading to this frustration. And Mr. Speaker, anyone who has driven through the beautiful riding of Richmond County, which I believe is one of the more beautiful ridings there is here in Nova Scotia, certainly on Cape Breton, but driving through Richmond County, after you pass the St. Peter's Canal, it's as if you've entered a different zone, because suddenly the road, the highway, is nothing comparable to what you would have seen from when you would have left the town of Port Hawkesbury to get to the St. Peter's Canal. Because what happened was years ago, when the highway was supposed to be built straight from Port Hawkesbury right down to Sydney, they stopped at St. Peter's, right at the beginning of the village of St. Peter's, in fact, right at the River Tillard Bridge. It ends. What's considered the new highway. Well, Mr. Speaker, the new highway was built a significant amount of years ago, so it's not really a new highway, even though people will still make reference to it. There has been no indication from government, and this government's been in office since 1999, so for the last 8 years, we have not been given any indication of whether they intend to continue the completion of the old new highway, let us say, or what do they plan on doing with route number 4. But Mr. Speaker, regardless of the condition of the road, you can't take away the beauty of the Bredor Lakes and the beauty of the mountains as you drive through the number 4 highway down to Sydney. Mr. Speaker, most people who would have driven that road have remarked on the beauty that is there, the friendliness of the people that are there, but at the end of the day, what's the one biggest thing they remark on? My God, you have terrible roads, and that road is terrible. And what's happening, Mr. Speaker, is that we often hear how improved roads lead to improved economic development. And I know the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal believes that. I've heard him say it, his Premier has said it in their speech from the throne, and they do believe that. But Mr. Speaker, there's no better example of how important good roads are to economic development than on route number 4. And let me give you an example for the Minister. You want to talk about something that's frustrating, Mr. Speaker. We have numerous tour buses which come to Cape Breton. And the Minister would be aware of that because Cape Breton Island has been designated, I think, as either one or the second best island to visit in the world. It's gotten great accolades. But here's what happens. The buses will come onto Cape Breton Island, they'll cross the causeway, and once they get on Cape Breton Island, they head up Route 105. It takes them through Inverness County, Victoria County, and they'll stop, they'll go through the Cabot Trail, and there's beautiful scenery along there as well. And many of them eventually will make their way down to the fortress of Louisbourg. Now, naturally, if you look at the way Cape Breton is set out, the natural fit would be, once they go up along the top of Cape Breton Island, then come down to Louisbourg, that they would continue along the southern coast of Cape Breton on Route 4 to exit Cape Breton. That way they've done the whole tour of Cape Breton Island. But you know what happens, Mr. Speaker? Those tour buses leave Louisbourg and go right back on the 105. That way they completely bypass Richmond County. They bypass St. Peter's. They bypass Johnstown. They bypass River Bourgeois, Ile-Madame, Louisdale, Lower River, Evanston. Communities that are losing all of this potential through this tourism traffic. Second of all, for the most part, heavy traffic can no longer travel on Route 4 because of the danger of that road. And Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Transportation staff were very diligent when I asked today for some of the statistics of accidents along that road. And I'm sure they would have given them to the Minister. St. Peter's to Soldiers Cove Road, since 2002, 18 accidents. Soldiers Cove Road to Richmond, Cape Breton County line, 23 accidents since 2002. Richmond, Cape Breton County line to Benyon, 31 accidents since 2002. Benyon to St. Andrews Channel to East Bay, 30 accidents. East Bay to Sydney Forks, 19 accidents. Sydney Forks to Sydney River, 39 accidents. And Mr. Speaker, if we add those all up, it's unacceptable. And I think the minister knows that. I know improvements have been made. I encourage him to continue that, but more importantly, let us know what work is going to take place. Let us know today what your plan is, when we can expect that work. The work that has been done to date, allow me to end by saying, Mr. Speaker, has all been done in Cape Breton County. Richmond County, from the St. Peter's Canal to the Cape Breton County line, has not seen any upgrades to that road other than minor surface patching. That is unacceptable. We need that whole route to be upgraded, but certainly the people of Richmond County expect that some of the most dangerous areas exist within our section, and we need to know when we can expect that that road is going to be upgraded. And at the end of the day, I believe the minister will see the results of that by seeing more tourism development along the Richmond County portion of that line, and at the end of the day, better economic development and a better future for the people of Richmond County and for the people throughout that old Route number 4. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable, the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to begin by thanking my honourable member opposite for bringing forward an issue I know that's most important to all of Cape Breton, in fact, all Nova Scotians. When it comes to roads, I think it's very topical on the minds of all Nova Scotians in this province and has been for quite some time. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise today to speak about upgrades needed on Trunk 4 in Cape Breton. Yesterday, as many members would know, there was a meeting of supporters of the Trunk 4 upgrade in Big Pond, as was mentioned by the honourable member. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, those folks and the honourable member opposite has a supporter in myself in regards to Trunk 4, and I couldn't agree more that this highway is a major artery between the Cape Breton Regional Municipality and the Strait area, and it definitely needs to be upgraded. Indeed, it is a priority project in the province strategy of infrastructure renewal. Both the Sydney Area Chamber of Commerce and the Strait Area of Chamber of Commerce argue that a better Trunk 4 would enhance business opportunities for both ends of Cape Breton Island. And I couldn't agree more, Mr. Speaker. As was said in the throne speech, our government is committed to improving its road system through a program to twin and modernize highways from Yarmouth to Sydney by the year 2020. It's part of our commitment to our growing economy for the 21st century. And Mr. Speaker, we've heard feedback, wonderful feedback on the upgrades that have been completed over Trunk 4 over the past few years that was mentioned by the honourable member from Richmond. We've completed 13 kilometres of upgrades at a cost of $9.5 million. And Mr. Speaker, those upgrades include 3 kilometres from Loch Lomond towards Sydney, 3 kilometres from Big Pond Centre to Middle Cape, and 7.5 kilometres from East Bay to Ben Yon. Sorry, all in Cape Breton County, as pointed out by my honourable colleague. We also completed during the same period $1 million of repaving from Lynch's River to the St. Peter's Canal Bridge. Mr. Speaker, we're committed to continued investment in Trunk 4, and I want to reassure the member opposite of that. Mr. Speaker, we plan to continue the upgrading of Trunk 4, and it will be widened, and we will improve both the vertical and horizontal alignments of the highway, making it safer and more efficient for the movement of all vehicles, particularly the ones mentioned earlier by the honourable member. Mr. Speaker, our investments over the next 6 to 7 years will result in a safer arterial highway from Sydney to St. Peter's. All of Trunk 4 will be upgraded. Mr. Speaker, we hope to sign an agreement with the federal government by next spring that will see Trunk 4 put forward as a cost-shared project that will be included work over the next few years. We can complete the upgrade at $4 million per year by 2013 on a cost-share basis. The total cost to complete the 44 kilometres upgrade is estimated, Mr. Speaker, at $25 million. We'll begin this important work by completing the 6-kilometre gap from this year's work at Ben Yon through to Big Pond at a total cost of $4 million in cost-shared dollars. Now, I heard the honourable member earlier, Mr. Speaker, put forward on behalf of his constituency, and I will tell the honourable member that I'm certainly willing to sit down as the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal next summer. As I'm still in this post, I'll sit down with the honourable member and look towards hearing what he would like to see how that project would fold in future years after that. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member speaks about a safer Trunk 4, and this government is committed to road safety. Our investments will result in a safer highway for Nova Scotians. Of course, Mr. Speaker, engineering and building better highways is just one way the government contributes to road safety. Nova Scotia's fatality and serious injury rates are lower than all but 2 jurisdictions and is considerably better than the Canadian average. The province has excellent coordination with other road safety agencies in the province and an effective, Mr. Speaker, very effective, Road Safety Advisory Committee. Mr. Speaker, we're on the right track in Nova Scotia, but we need to do more to reduce fatalities and serious injuries through strategies that focus on drinking driving, speeding, seatbelt use, and distracted driving. Nova Scotia's efforts to improve driver safety were recognized, Mr. Speaker, this year by Mothers Against Drunk Driving. MAD's 2007 progress report cited Nova Scotia as setting a good example to other jurisdictions in Canada by introducing important legislative reforms. Recent legislative amendments brought in by the province include strengthening the graduate licensing program, preparing an alcohol ignition interlock program, and a new vehicle impoundment system. Still, Mr. Speaker, we are seeing too many injuries and far too many fatalities. Mr. Speaker, there's no simple solution to ensuring road safety. That is the reason we need to make several road safety amendments to the Motor Vehicle Act. We've introduced Bill number 7 to make our community safer and address the concerns of Nova Scotians. Clearly, highway improvements, new laws, and programs to reduce injuries and deaths will result in a safer and much improved conditions, particularly on Trunk 4, as was mentioned by the member opposite. Now, Mr. Speaker, I do want to say this. You know, I've been in this legislature for approximately 10 years now, and you know, Mr. Speaker, when I came in here 10 years ago, I can tell you that if I closed my eyes and listened to the honourable member, I would have given the same speech here as he has given here tonight. Road improvements, Mr. Speaker, have been obviously identified as a priority by this government. 10 years ago, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you when the phone rang, 3/4 of the time the phone rang was about issues around road and road improvements and much-needed paving. Yes. Do you know, Mr. Speaker, this government, and governments make decisions in regards to priorities and tough decisions, Mr. Speaker. This government has made a decision that road improvements are a priority with us. Mr. Speaker, the Premier's made a commitment of 2,000 kilometres of paving over 4 years, of which, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member was supporting that. We'll get his fair share. For Richmond, Richmond will get their fair share, Mr. Speaker, but I can tell you the Premier made a commitment of 2,000 kilometres. The first year we fulfilled our commitment. The second we fulfilled our commitment. And Mr. Speaker, we will fulfill our commitment in year 3 and year 4. We will reach 2,000 kilometres, Mr. Speaker, by the end of next year. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member would agree as well that if you look at our budget compared to budgets by previous governments, we have certainly identified road improvements, road paving, repaving as a priority, and we've indicated through our budgets. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member would agree with me that as he so eloquently put it tonight, his riding needs more paving, and I agree with him, Mr. Speaker, and we will ensure that his concerns are addressed in my department. And I think, Mr. Speaker, I've outlined here tonight our plan for Trunk 4, which will guarantee, Mr. Speaker, that the travelers in Cape Breton and those who visit there are able to drive on a safe highway, Mr. Speaker. Much needed improvements, and Mr. Speaker, this government will fulfill its commitments, and I thank the honourable member for bringing it forward here tonight. And I look forward to working with him in regards to how we'll identify over the next 4 to 5 to 6 years the projects that will be in line for the honourable member's riding that I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, will satisfy he and his constituents and all the Cape Breton folks who deserve, such as these Chamber of Commerce who have discussed this over the last while, who are very much deserving of these road improvements, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure you they will get those improvements under Conservative government, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to stand here, and I want to thank my honourable member from Richmond. He beat me to the question today about number 4 highway in Cape Breton, and the good people of Cape Breton absolutely deserve to see that road construction continue on but what I want to talk about is some of the road priorities in the riding of Queens, because I think we have heard a lot of discussion around Route 4, and I don't think there's much more I can add. But I do want to bring the minister's attention to some of the concerns that I'm hearing in the riding of Queens. And certainly the communities in the Petite Riviere, Vugler's Cove, Cherry Hill, Italy Cross and Crowstown communities on the Lunenburg end of the riding have a lot of concerns about the secondary roads. And of course, in rural Nova Scotia, as we all know, not every community or not every resident resident is traveling out on the Ceres highways to get from community to community. You know, it is the secondary roads that link our communities, and those people who work within those communities or have family in their communities that they're caring for. And sometimes we overlook those secondary roads as really vital arteries within those communities. The exits off of the Ceres highways, exit 15 and exit 16, that take commuters off of the Ceres highways into the communities of Italy Cross, Crowstown, and down to the wonderful community of Petite Riviere, which is a coastal community. It's also a tourist destination, as just up the way from Petite Riviere is the provincial park, Rizzers Beach, which is a very well-visited beach. And a lot of people in and around those areas are telling me that they've actually seen tourists come down as far as perhaps one of the bridges and finding that they have to turn around and come back because the roads are in such poor conditions. So I'd like to bring those two particular exits going into those communities. Exit 15 goes into the communities of Vugler's Cove and Cherry Hill, and again, they are coastal communities and very vital to our tourism industry along the South Shore. So those are two exits leading into those secondary roads that really need a lot of attention. There's been a little bit of patching here in this past budget season. The Department of Transportation has been very good, you know, with the RIM funding, and they have identified some of those areas, but unfortunately it just hasn't been enough, so I'm hoping there will be some attention paid there. One vital route that I would like to bring the minister's attention to, and that is Route 8. You may be familiar with the importance of Route 8 to our communities. Route 8 is an essential link between the South Shore and the Western Shore, both the south end of the riding being Queens and the the south end of Route 8 being Queens County, and the northern end of that route would be in the riding of Annapolis County. Municipal colleagues, both in the municipality of Queens and the municipality of Annapolis and the town of Annapolis Royal, have joined together some time ago to work on advocating for the development of Route 8, and some work has been started. About 2 years ago on the south end side of Route 8, there has been some construction done. It's looking great in that end of the area. However, Route 8 needs to be further developed to really promote the vital link that Route 8 is to both the South Shore and the western part of Nova Scotia. You may be familiar that the Keji-Makuchi Park resides along Route 8, and it's a very important national park in the riding, as you are probably aware. There is a lot of attractions for tourists, for canoeists, for residents in the area for many, many years. In fact, I was a camper at Keji for probably 10 years of my younger life. I even had the experience of winter camping there one year. It's a beautiful, beautiful park. We really see it as one of the jewels in both the riding of Queens and also the riding of Annapolis County. Route 8 is such an vital link. It's heavily accessed, as I said, by persons coming into the area, enjoying the scenery, enjoying the park, but it's also a vital route for the forestry sector. And it's that vital route that's also a service route for the forestry sector. And because it is used in that way, the road has, as you can well imagine, with years and daily use of heavy logging trucks using that particular route, it is pretty well worn in a lot of places, which poses a lot of health and safety risks along that route for all drivers on the roads. I understand that municipal colleagues, they are promoting this route as a Keji Scenic Drive, and I believe perhaps the minister may have received already some correspondence from those municipalities who are advocating for the development of Route 8. What they're proposing is makes a lot of economic sense. It makes a lot of sense in terms of really promoting the Southwest tourist destination projects that have been that are being worked on in that area. It's something that would benefit not only the riding of Queens, but it would also benefit greatly the riding of Annapolis as well. There's a lot of potential there to promote not only the tourism end of things, but certainly we could really engage in perhaps looking at bicycle trails at some point in time if that highway was developed in such a way that we could promote bicycle tours. We could see more canoeists, more tourists, and also promoting the rich culture and history along that route that has been part of both of those ridings for well over 9,000 years, starting with the Mi'kmaq communities, and also the British and French who had landed there many years ago. So there is lots of potential for that particular route to be developed. But in order to develop all of those good things, we need to see that vital link really have some serious dollars invested into making that a reality for both of those areas. So I'm hoping that when the minister has time to review that particular correspondence and is able to sit down with those partners at the table and the other ministers within government that would have a stake in promoting that Route 8, not only as a tourist destination, but an economic development perspective and also from a community perspective. So I'm hoping to hear some good positive comments come out of a review or a discussion with those partners at the table. I know I'm running a little bit, a minute and a half. The next minute and a half, I want to draw your attention to some other important community roads in the riding of Queens, that being the Westfield Road. The North Westfield Road is in the community of North Queens, and again, like all of our other secondary roads, this particular road links the community of Westfield, and I have traveled on that road many, many times over the past year and a half and then some. And I can tell you this is one of the roughest sections of secondary roads that I have witnessed in a long time. So much so that there is actually grass growing between the cracks in the highway. So I'd like the minister to have a close look at that particular road. I've been in correspondence with the department in the past, identifying that North Westfield Road as an important secondary road. And also, I've also promoted the Southwest Port Mattoon Road as another vital secondary road into one of my communities in the riding of Queens. And again, these are very important links to our communities. And again, I'll remind the minister that a lot of residents in our communities don't necessarily travel on the
Order,
Ceres
please.
Highway
Order, please.
daily.
The member's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the Honourable the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the next 3 minutes, I would like to share some comments in regards to transportation and highways in the riding in which I represent, the riding of the Eastern Shore. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last number of years, it's no secret to this House, it's certainly no secret to the people of the Eastern Shore, I've been a lobbyist for asphalt on the Eastern Shore because I believe that good roads make good communities grow and creates an opportunity for tourism, for economic development, for good health, Mr. Speaker, for education, and all those good things that the government brings to us, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can remember the first road I paved when I was an elected MLA in 1999. That road was to the Clam Harbour Beach. And at that time, Mr. Speaker, it was the thought of many that the reason why people were not visiting that beautiful beach, it was that the road was somewhat disruptive and that people did not enjoy that journey. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, it was true, because once the road was paved and the people learned about that, the traffic has increased. And now the people from Metro and from other parts of the province can certainly go and enjoy the beautiful beach at Clam Harbour. Mr. Speaker, we worked together as a community, and it wasn't long before the government decided to start paving the number 7 highway. The number 7 highway, Mr. Speaker, is a traditional highway that for many, many years the people of the Eastern Shore travel to and from Metro. Mr. Speaker, we know that Metro is sort of a bedroom community to the Eastern Shore rather than the Eastern Shore being a bedroom community to Metro. Many people enjoy all the things that we have and the attributes that we are willing to share, the good people of Metro. So, Mr. Speaker, we have now completed that number 7 highway from the Eastern Shore through the Preston riding and into Dartmouth, and we're very proud that the collective effort and we've been successful. We are also now addressing the 107 highway, Mr. Speaker. The 107 highway is the 100 series highway. And next spring, I believe that the full highway from Musquodoboit to the Dartmouth area will be repaved. I'm very thankful for that. Mr. Speaker, I also believe that the many byroads that have been paved under my watch and under my leadership and under my lobbying efforts have made the constituents of the Eastern Shore very happy. They're very supportive of the MLA, and they're very supportive of the progressive conservative government, I may add. And I've watched many ministers take a real interest in my riding, a real interest, and we've talked for many, many hours and had dialogue about the importance, Mr. Speaker, of pavement to the people that I represent.
Order, please. Order, please. Time has expired on the late show. I want to thank all the honourable members for having taken part in tonight's late show. We will now return to public bills for second reading. The Chair now recognizes the Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we broke, I was explaining, Mr. Speaker, why I believe that this bill in particular was nothing more than a political tactic that was being used by the government to try and take advantage of divisions within this province to try and pit some Nova Scotians against others. And Mr. Speaker, I think that is obvious in the way that the government has approached this particular piece of legislation. We here on this side of the House, in our time here, have made a virtue out of being constructive with respect to the things that we do on behalf of the people that we represent. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, when the government has brought forward pieces of legislation and budgets that we felt were worthy of support, we supported them. And sometimes there were others in the House who did not agree with us in doing that. But we worked hard to say that what is fundamental to the manner in which we will conduct ourselves in this House is to decide in each and every case what is fair, what is just, and what is in the best interest of the people of the House. That is the principles. That is the principle on which we govern ourselves on this side of the House. And so, Mr. Speaker, it's at this time that I would like to take particular note of the responsible manner, what I believe is the responsible manner in which the Liberal MLAs and their leader approached this legislation. Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, the record of the Nova Scotia NDP, when faced with arbitrary attempts to take away the rights of workers, meant that where we would stand on this bill was not in doubt. Nurses and other healthcare workers looked to the Liberals as the party with the balance of power in this House. And the Liberal caucus studied the issues. They gathered expert advice on the situation in Ontario and Alberta and stated their position early. And they are to be congratulated for that, and I do. Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, so I want to go back, Mr. Speaker, to why this political tactic is so important to the government. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives ran in the last election with a platform that was composed almost entirely of ideas that they borrowed from other parties. Nova Scotians saw that the Conservatives themselves had very few ideas, if any, to offer. And the Conservatives lost more seats. And the reaction to that, Mr. Speaker, instead of trying to govern better, The Premier and his colleagues are searching for some kind of a magic bullet, something that will restore them to what they believe is their rightful place in government. They seek a wedge issue that will stop the loss of support that they have suffered over the last 2 elections. And yet, Mr. Speaker, they have failed to rally support for this bill, either in this House or in this province. This bill is based on false premises. And contrary to the Conservative claims, it would be an extraordinary and dangerous step. Alberta, Ontario, and PER are the only provinces that have banned the right to strike. Alberta is the only province where the right to strike was removed against the will of workers within living memory. Contrary to the Conservative claims, this bill would not end healthcare strikes. It would make them longer and harder to resolve and more expensive, Mr. Speaker. Contrary to the Conservative claims, healthcare strikes do not shut down institutions. Nurses do not turn their backs on anyone who needs urgent care. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that I was profoundly, profoundly disappointed to hear the Minister of Labour say that members of this legislature do not believe in the safety and security of the people of this province, because I do not believe that. Mr. Speaker, I am willing to say that what the government proposes is wrong. I am willing to say that what they propose is misguided. But I do not believe that they would consciously put at risk the safety and security of the people of this province. I do not believe that. Mr. Speaker, across Canada, any government or manager with the good sense to talk with the workers can reach an emergency services or essential services agreement. All it takes, Mr. Speaker, is good faith at the bargaining table. And contrary to what the Minister of Labour says, this legislation is not fair. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Labour quoted from J.S. Woodsworth. I want you to know, and members opposite to know, and many of my colleagues may know this, I have a picture of J.S. Woodsworth in my office, in my constituency office. And I have read the debates of his speech, and I have read his books, and I want the minister to know that he is no J.S. Woodsworth. You do not demonstrate good faith bargaining by tabling ultimatums. Yet that is precisely what the Conservatives did with this legislation. Who would ever trust their promises of fairness and real negotiation when the legislation itself is a non-negotiable demand? Contrary to the Conservatives' claims, this bill is not about the health and safety of Nova Scotians. In our healthcare system, it is the nurses, the technicians, the paramedics, and all of the other dedicated healthcare workers who protect Nova Scotians' health and safety. It is not cabinet ministers. It is the frontline healthcare workers who have undertaken a professional duty to protect every person who comes through the hospital door. And we trust our healthcare workers to exercise their skill and their judgment at the operating table, and we can trust them to exercise their trust and judgment at the negotiating table. Mr. Speaker, if he has a concern, rather than an ultimatum, the Premier can just pick up the phone and talk with the representatives of the nurses and other healthcare workers. And if any government is seriously concerned about healthcare-labor relations, it could undertake an independent, impartial inquiry. In fact, Mr. Speaker, that is exactly what the Cameron Conservatives did. The Kidd report told them, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell you that I read not only the results of the inquiry, but I read many of the submissions because I wanted to know on what basis the Kidd report was actually filed. And he came to the conclusion that taking away the right to strike would do more harm than good, that it would make matters worse, Mr. Speaker. And this was the advice that he gave to the Cameron Conservatives, and it was good advice, but unlike most good advice to this government, it is being ignored. Mr. Speaker, let's imagine for a second that this bill was about to be approved. What would happen if it became law? The best advice and the lessons of experience everywhere tell us what to expect. Healthcare workers could simply ignore the law, continue to hold strike votes, as they do in Alberta. Healthcare workers could engage in wildcat strikes, making the system unstable and unmanageable. The experience that was found when Quebec tried to shut down collective bargaining. There could be mass resignations, as happened after Bill 68, and as we almost seen happen in other situations where workers felt that free collective bargaining had not taken place. And finally, we could see even more serious dislocations and workplace problems, as have been reported after decades without free bargaining in Ontario hospitals. None of those results, Mr. Speaker, none of those results would be good for healthcare. Healthcare is the most important issue in Nova Scotia, but this bill is not about healthcare. This bill would do nothing to address the healthcare concerns of Nova Scotians. Ask any group of Nova Scotians for the top 5 ways the government should address healthcare concerns, and nobody, Mr. Speaker, nobody except the Premier says, take away the bargaining rights of healthcare workers. This bill is about political tactics and scare tactics. Nova Scotians have healthcare concerns that the government has neglected. When Nova Scotians express their real concerns about healthcare, this government tries to change the subject. For months, they said that this legislation was the centerpiece of their legislation for the year, and yet it became a footnote in the throne speech. Instead of pursuing this legislation, the government should have shown the leadership required to keep emergency rooms open, to give every Nova Scotian access to a family doctor, to cut surgery wait times, to ensure the timely testing for serious illnesses, and to open more beds instead of blocking hundreds of them. Managing health care is not easy, but neither is it impossible. Mr. Speaker, very few governments have gone down a dead end with what they call the most important piece of legislation. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that tonight, this government in this House will not bring this to a vote because they do not want the people of Nova Scotia to express their will through the members of this legislature, Mr. Speaker. They are afraid to have the judgment of the people of Nova Scotia on this piece of legislation. At the last moment, after months of declarations that this was the major issue of the fall session, the government has informed the other parties that they will not bring this bill to a vote. They will not even let the people, let the House and the representatives elected by the people of this province make a decision. Mr. Speaker, some have suggested that this government is willing to provoke a strike or a threat of a strike in a desperate effort to take attention away from the Conservatives' mismanagement of the healthcare system. Earlier this fall, Nova Scotians saw a public agency urge registered nurses to hold a strike vote. I sincerely hope that the Conservatives realize that Nova Scotians recognize desperate political tactics. The government should ensure that its negotiators seek settlements, not disruptions in our healthcare system. I urge the government to reflect on the political capital and the government's credibility that they have invested in this tactic before they go charging off after another magic bullet. It would have been much better to invest the government's efforts in the reduction of wait times and thereby do the job that Nova Scotians elected them to do. It would be wise for this government to remember that it is in a minority situation and that it must take into consideration the views of the members of this House, because that was the decision of the voters, a decision that all of us are well advised to accept. Mr. Speaker, it would still be much better for the government to try and unite rather than divide this province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to rise and speak to Bill 1, Mr. Speaker. I want to, first of all, speak to the Minister directly. When the Minister suggested that perhaps this time for a mature way to settle labour disruptions in the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I enjoy the very fact and very proud of the two children that my wife and I share. My daughter Colleen is 18 and our son Jeffrey just turned 16. I can't wait to actually get home and take him for his first drive. But we have instructed them, quite frankly, the way to solve issues is to sit down and discuss them and talk directly. Not to be, quite frankly, using a heavy hand that you have. We're not going to vote on this bill tonight because I believe government wants to hold this over the head of the nurses who are in negotiations now. Is that the kind of Nova Scotia that we want? Is that the new Nova Scotia? Mr. Speaker, I don't believe it's the kind of Nova Scotia that Nova Scotians want. It may be this government's vision for Nova Scotia, but it's not the kind of Nova Scotia that Nova Scotians want. This is a divisive piece of legislation. It is dividing Nova Scotians, and it will not solve, quite frankly, the issues that the Labour Minister speaks about. It's been proven from one end of this country to the other. This legislation will not work. And I would encourage the Minister, as he said, as he traveled around and he sent people from all over the world looking for the way they deal with issues, I would tell him to send a very clear message to those other provinces and those other countries and those other jurisdictions. Look inward to the province of Nova Scotia, because what we're doing here when it comes to labour issues in the province of Nova Scotia is working. 97% of our labour issues are settled without a strike, Mr. Speaker, and those are the facts according to his own government and his own department. On April 28th, I was given the great honour of being the leader of the Nova Scotia Liberal Party. On April 29th, I had a call. The House might be going in on Monday because we may be bringing back to work legislation. Welcome to your new job. Mr. Speaker, thankfully, that didn't happen. And we've talked about the issue of the IWK. And we've talked about the issue that how difficult strikes are on the people of Nova Scotia. There isn't a single person in Nova Scotia who wants a strike. There isn't a single person who wants a strike, including those very healthcare workers that you're taking away the right from. What they want, though, is to have the right to sit down with the government and bargain in good faith and make sure that they have that tool to be able to not go to work. Those are the very facts, Mr. Premier, Mr. Speaker. Sorry. The Premier often talks about courage, and he says doing this is the right thing. Mr. Speaker, the easiest thing for me in this caucus to do would have been to support this government. I think it's fair to say to the members who are here, who are leaders in the union movement in the province of Nova Scotia, they don't vote, quite frankly, for me. And I think most of them would tell you that. Nor do they vote, I would suggest, for the government. But this to me, quite frankly, is not about politics. When I asked to be the leader of the Nova Scotia Liberal Party, I didn't ask to be leader so we could divide Nova Scotians and take away their rights. I asked to be the leader of the Nova Scotia Liberal Party so we could put forth good, constructive solutions to the issues facing Nova Scotians. You know, Mr. Speaker, when you look around, and we've traveled Nova Scotia, and I've been traveling it a little more frequently lately, and when Nova Scotians start talking about the issue of health care, they do not bring up the issue of strikes. What they talk about, I need a family doctor. There's a shortage of nurses, wait times, ER closures. This government has talked about the less than the 24-hour strike that happened at the IWK. And Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunate that Nova Scotians, young children, were sent home that day. It is unfortunate. But how many times each and every day in the province of Nova Scotia are Nova Scotians sent home? How many? I'm sure the Minister of Health could tell us that. How many surgeries are cancelled in the province of Nova Scotia every day? Every day. Those are the crises that are facing Nova Scotians the majority of the times. We spoke about the mental health issue of adolescents and the fact that some of them were sent home. Mr. Speaker, how many of them are on wait lists looking for an opportunity to receive service in the province of Nova Scotia? That's what this government's not talking about. That's what this government should be talking about, and that's what Nova Scotians expect us to be talking about in this House. It is my wish, and on behalf of our caucus, I want to encourage the Premier to, when he finishes speaking tonight, and I hope he speaks on this piece of legislation, which I'm sure he will, that he calls this for a vote and allows people's representatives to voice their opinion. When I asked for the honor of sitting in this legislature, people expected me to make decisions which I felt was in their best interest. And I am prepared to cast my vote and then defend it to Nova Scotians and to my constituents. Well, Mr. Speaker, I hear that the former Minister of Health who couldn't solve the wait times, couldn't bring doctors in, haven't dealt with nurses, sits there and decides that we provided respect to his Minister of Health, we would receive it from him. Would that be right? Mr. Speaker, and he says, we spoke before we saw the legislation. The Minister of Labour took an op-ed piece in the Chronicle Herald, told Nova Scotians he was taking away the right to strike, replacing with binding arbitration. What's in the legislation? We don't know. He told us that he was going to engage Nova Scotians. He went online to engage Nova Scotians. I won't repeat that. I'll leave that alone. But Mr. Speaker, when we saw the direction of this government, what were we going to sit down and discuss with them? They'd already made their mind up. Why do you think healthcare workers are not sitting down at the table with them? The decision was made. That's not the kind of government Nova Scotians expect. If you want to negotiate, if you want to sit down, let's sit down at the table. You know what? They will not always agree. Let's be honest. There will be tough times sitting at the negotiating table. But Mr. Speaker, people died for the right to strike. It is not an issue when it comes to health care in the province of Nova Scotia, and we are now debating it. Instead of talking about why the ERs aren't open. Mr. Speaker, you know that. You know that from the beautiful island of Cape Breton. With the blood and sweat that people have made to ensure that they have the right to strike, so that they can defend their right, so they can fight for the issues that matter for them. What's really interesting about this debate, Mr. Speaker, is when you talk about it, people get caught up in the issue. It seems to always be about money. Well, it's not about money. It's not about money. it's about the very fact that when I listen to nurses who say, I can't plan a vacation. I'm working 10 days in a row. I'm being called in when I'm home because we don't have enough nurses to staff the healthcare facilities in your riding. That's the issue that's being faced with. And when I think for a second here, with all due respect to my colleague from Richmond, we're going to allow a lawyer to determine the healthcare issues. Now, Mr. Speaker, the money of issue is one that we debate on. How does a lawyer know, quite frankly, what the work environment is like in the hospitals across Nova Scotia? What do they know? And I hear a few members across the House agreeing with me. Perhaps they should turn and speak to the Minister of Labour and tell him they agree with me. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to close with a quote because I've listened in this House as the Minister spoke and quoted, and I didn't want to feel left out, but I'll table this. Behind the resolution which is before us this evening, Mr. Speaker, is the sentiment which many nurses have expressed to me, that they have been unfairly depicted as not being concerned about the public safety of Nova Scotia in the event of a strike. And I, for one, can only say that for myself, that I have never doubted that the acute healthcare workers would do everything they could to ensure that the public safety of Nova Scotia. Indeed, I know from my work as a clergy member that they have the utmost concern. Nurses, technologists, doctors have an unfailing commitment to our public health care and safety. Mr. Speaker, that was the Honourable Minister of Labour. I would encourage the Minister and that government to read those words again and respect the healthcare workers in this province. Let's put this to a vote. Let's settle the issue tonight, and tomorrow we can then continue to work on the real issues that face Nova Scotians when it comes to healthcare, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
The Honourable, the Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight on Bill number 1, an act to provide for the fair resolution of health care or community services disputes through mediation and binding arbitration. And Mr. Speaker, I repeat, community services. Now, this is without doubt one of the most important pieces of legislation proposed by this government. Mr. Speaker, it speaks to our vision of a new Nova Scotia, a place where quality health and service is available to everyone, Mr. Speaker, who needs it. Now, last week, Premier MacDonald released a social prosperity framework for this province. That vision speaks to a place where every Nova Scotian has the opportunity to live well and contribute in a meaningful way within a province that is caring, safe, and creative now and into the future. Now, since becoming Minister of Community Services, Mr. Speaker, I have found what is now my favorite quote. In the 1970s, United States Vice President Hubert Humphrey said, and I quote, I update it slightly, Mr. Speaker, "The moral test of government is how that government treats those who were in the dawn of life, the children, those who are in the twilight of life, the elderly, and those who are in the shadows of life, the sick, the needy, and the disabled." While the moral test remains, Mr. Speaker, many things have changed since then. Now, my department, through the Services for Persons with Disabilities program, has helped our clients out of the shadows, Mr. Speaker, by supporting people at various stages of their development and independence. We aim to achieve results through our Services for Persons with Disabilities Renewal Initiative, with the right blend and number of facility-based and community-based supports and services. The primary emphasis is on building and integrating these supports into the community, adding services where there are gaps. In late September, I spoke to the Nova Scotia Residential Agencies Association at their annual meeting. As Minister of Community Services, I gave them my personal commitment that I would continue to be the champion for the Services for Persons with Disabilities program with my colleagues in Cabinet. I think my colleagues
Order, please.
would agree.
Order, please. The honourable member from Dartmouth South. From Cape Breton South.
While I know that everybody is very interested in listening to the Minister of Community Services, what she's talking about right now, Mr. Speaker, is light years away from the topic that we're debating here this evening. I would ask you, Mr. Speaker, to ask her to stick to the topic.
Thank you, honourable member. The debate on second reading is pretty, yes, very general, I must say. It's very broad, and the honourable member, the honourable minister, has the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable colleague because, Mr. Speaker, Services for Persons with Disabilities is indeed a very important aspect of what we're discussing here this evening, Mr. Speaker, and the aspect that perhaps has been sidelined. And I want to ensure that all members of this House recognize the importance of the community services component of Bill number 1. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will continue. So, Mr. Speaker, I think my colleagues would agree that this is one of my top priorities in an area where I want to see significant advancement. I am pleased with and grateful for the tremendous support I have received from my colleagues. Now, those same colleagues have spoken today with both passion and reason as to why the government's legislation is the right thing to do. I don't need to repeat their rationale for legislation that is balanced, fair, and respectful. What I can share with you, Mr. Speaker, is that our staff have heard from their colleagues in other provincial jurisdictions, and they say that Nova Scotia is emerging as a leader in providing an alternative response mechanism where essential services are involved. And make no mistake, the Department of Community Services provides essential services. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's easy for the public to understand how they or their loved ones might be adversely affected by a hospital strike. Whether it's a cancelled appendectomy, postponement of a chemotherapy treatment, or the loss of a counseling session for a youth, we can imagine that impact, Mr. Speaker. Now, unless you are familiar with residential care settings for persons with intellectual or physical disabilities, it's not as easy to understand or appreciate what's involved. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you, and I want to tell the honourable members of this House, but most of all, I want to tell the 2,100 staff who are represented by several unions that I have the utmost respect for what they do. And Mr. Speaker, I want to tell those 2,100 staff that I have seen for myself how much they care for the clients they support each and every day. And by care, Mr. Speaker, I don't just mean the level of service these staff provide. I mean how much they care about the men, women, and children in these homes. And these are reliable numbers, Mr. Speaker. But of course, they can fluctuate from day to day. In the community services sector, there are 2,100 staff who care for 2,272 Nova Scotians. That's a very good ratio of staff care, Mr. Speaker. It's necessary due to the special needs and high level of care required by many of these individuals. For each residential setting I've visited, I've had a strong emotional response to watching the staff and administration with the personal care they give to the residents. Mr. Speaker, from the upkeep and cleanliness of the home, and sometimes, Mr. Speaker, these buildings are very old, to the good and nutritious meals that are served, to the patience, compassion, and professionalism of the RNs and LPNs. These people are special, and they give their all every day, every night, because, Mr. Speaker, they care. They care about each one of the 2,272 Nova Scotians in these homes, because to them, they are people. People for whom they care about and people for whom they care for. And Mr. Speaker, if you want to see gratitude in the eyes of residents for their caregivers, pay a visit to one of these homes. And while I'm at it, let us all remember the distinction here, Mr. Speaker. I'm not talking about hospitals. I'm talking about people's homes. For many of those 2,272 Nova Scotians, these residential settings are the only home they've ever known. There are those who are lucky enough, Mr. Speaker, to have caring families who visit and who can take care of their brother or their daughter, perhaps take them out for a drive, Mr. Speaker. There are also many who don't have that extra bit of love and attention. And it is for those people, Mr. Speaker, that the staff become their family. The staff are the ones who feed them, give them their medications, comfort them, and become their family. I have witnessed this kind of care, Mr. Speaker, but I don't have enough time on the clock nor words tonight to impart to you and all of my colleagues what I've had the honor to be party to in these residential homes. So for me, Mr. Speaker, I know about the dedication and commitment of the staff who belong to the 8 unions in the 24 unionized settings across this province. And as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, it is not only adults with physical or mental disabilities in these services for persons with disabilities home who would be affected by a strike, but children in group home settings as well. Right now, we have the capacity for 176 beds in licensed residential child caring facilities. That's 176 Nova Scotian vulnerable children. 20 of these 24 facilities are unionized settings. While the numbers can change daily, we're talking about approximately 160 children and youth between the ages of 8 and 18 in child welfare group homes who would be affected by a strike. Mr. Speaker, I have the responsibility for ensuring the safety of children who are unable to live with their families, either through abuse or neglect. That's why the stability of these homes is so important. Mr. Speaker, I take that responsibility extremely seriously. And again, Mr. Speaker, all members of this House would be impressed by the dedication and commitment of these workers on behalf of the children and youth in their care. Mr. Speaker, children and youth who come from all parts of Nova Scotia, each and every one of our communities. I believe that these workers consider striking to be their last option. Through this legislation and debate, I also want all Nova Scotians to know that striking isn't the best option, and it's hardly the only option. The legislation that my colleague introduced provides two new tools to settle disputes: interest arbitration and binding mediation. The legislation respects the collective bargaining process and it respects the workers. And Mr. Speaker, I believe that what union leadership wants is not always what union membership wants. Many Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, will remember back to 2003 when the employees of the Regional Residential Services Society went on strike. And Mr. Speaker, I know members in this House speak of 3 healthcare strikes over the past number of years, but Mr. Speaker, the title of this bill includes community services. And Mr. Speaker, the Regional Residential Services Society, or RRSS, was then and still is the largest residential service provider in Nova Scotia. Its homes are primarily located in the metro area in Halifax Regional Municipality. In 2003, they were serving 178 Nova Scotian clients with intellectual disabilities in 40 residential settings. For those who may have forgotten, or perhaps who never knew, the RRSS strike lasted 77 days. There were 210 unionized staff on strike, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, do not count out community services when speaking to this legislation. Do not count out the Nova Scotians who are most vulnerable, Mr. Speaker. 50% of the residents were relocated to Simpson Hall, the old nurses' residence on the grounds of the Nova Scotia Hospital, to their family homes, or to other RRSS sites. Many residents did not have a family home to go to. My own community services staff recently showed me a status report from 2003 on this strike, which outlined the situation and reads as follows. The strike is going into the 7th week. There are 178 clients affected. Over the course of 7 weeks, there have been a number of changes in the original contingency plan. Approximately 14 family situations have broken down, and clients have returned to RRSS sites. 2 sites had to be reopened due to family breakdowns. There are currently 34 clients at the congregate care site at Simpson Hall. Clients have had to adjust to new surroundings, new staff, loss of familiar people or friends, and picketing activity due to the prolonged labor dispute. Care coordinators who are monitoring the safety and well-being of clients are expressing concern over what appears to be their overall decline in mental health. Simpson Hall has been the target of frequent picketing and a recent candlelight vigil, which has been disruptive and very upsetting to the clients. At that point, approximately 6 weeks into the strike, no active discussion or negotiation had taken place. Mr. Speaker, how can we, as a government, allow that kind of situation to repeat itself? How can we, Mr. Speaker, all of us, as representatives of the people, let down those very people who are relying on us to do the right thing, Mr. Speaker? How can honourable members opposite claim that interest arbitration or binding mediation won't appeal to unionized workers? Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, my job as Minister of Community Services is to ensure the safety and well-being of our most vulnerable citizens. I don't believe I'm the only person in this House who shares that responsibility. Mr. Speaker, this is not about removing anyone's rights. The staff that I talked with are intelligent, caring people. What alternatives are there for staff in this position? Some of them believe their union is taking a firm stance, and they agree with it. Many of them are conflicted between their loyalty and devotion to the people they support and the direction of their leadership. I can assure you that their commitment, Mr. Speaker, is sincere. Now, with your indulgence, Mr. Speaker, I want to read part of a letter from an RRSS worker on strike in 2003. To whom it may concern, I take a stand for our clients who are the primary employers of our RSS. This labor dispute may turn out to be a win-win situation for union, government, and agency, but the end result will be a total loss for our primary employers, our clients. The irony of this labor dispute is the absence of the voice of our true employers, the clients. They have been shamelessly dispossessed of choice by this so-called democratic process. Our clients have been callously thrown into a situation which contravenes the training and sensitivity we as employees have been taught in the delivery of excellent service. People our clients trust to protect are now treating them with the same societal ignorance they endure daily in the outside world. Innocently caught up in a battle that is not theirs, they have been removed from their homes without choice, placed in a state of confusion. subjected to opportunities of elevated emotional stress, subjected to broken routines, subjected to radical change in environment, placed in unfamiliar surroundings, subjected to loss of personal security, lost important personal contact, given no assurance of return to a normal existence, subjected to loss of safety, comfort, and trust, subjected to forced loss of trust between client and RRSS counselors, reintroduced to institutionalization, undue pressure and worry placed on families and parents, vulnerable to behaviors in their temporary environment and when they return home, used as a pawn in this negotiating process with no benefit to them, potential health and safety issues such as administering wrong medications, not administering medications on time, inability to cope with escalated behaviors, escalation of health issues such as seizures from stress related to the current situation. This whole process is morally and democratically unfair to our clients and their families. I am totally dedicated to my clients I serve. I will lend a voice which they are unable to give. To the government, I remind you, you are dealing with people's lives, people who cannot necessarily lend a voice to a process such as this. This makes them vulnerable and unprotected regarding their human rights. You need to recognize and acknowledge this is a crisis situation that needs immediate, proactive intervention. To RRSS, remember the value of your clients and your frontline people. You have been blessed with devotion, excellent service, and commitment. You also have been blessed with family members who believe and depend on the service your frontline people provide. Signed from the heart, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, not only Mr. Speaker, not only is it heartbreaking to hear firsthand the effect of this strike on innocent victims.
Order, please. There's been a request for the minister to table that letter once she is done with it, please. The Honourable the Minister of Community Service.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be pleased to if the Honourable Page would make a copy and provide it to whoever would like to have a copy, respecting the individual's name, Mr. Speaker.
Just to table the document, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be pleased to continue as my honourable colleague is encouraging me to.
Please do.
Not only, Mr. Speaker, is it heartbreaking to hear firsthand the effect of this strike on innocent victims, but it also shows the conflict of the worker to cross the line and return to help the individuals in care, or to stand with the union and walk a picket line. This is the choice that union leadership forced upon their members. Mr. Speaker, even the threat of a strike can have a devastating effect on everyone involved, as we just heard, Mr. Speaker. Those most directly affected include the service provider, the staff, the clients, and the families. All must be involved in contingency planning, Mr. Speaker, which begins when negotiations begin. Mr. Speaker, referring to the Regional Residential Services Society, I will quote again a letter from the Executive Director, Bev Wicks, which I will table after I read, Mr. Speaker. We are now in day 12 of this job action, and it is taking a significant toll on our residents. We think that government should intervene in this matter and legislate these employees back to work. We understand that such a serious step requires the balancing of the employee's right to strike in order to exert pressure on the employer with the rights of our residents to maintain their health, dignity, and welfare. There is absolutely no question in this instance that the harm being caused to our residents far outweighs the collective bargaining rights of our employees. A young man who recently moved out of an institution into his community after many years of waiting expressed his fear that if this strike didn't get fixed, he would never get back to his new home. He spoke of the use of restraint jackets and the desperate self-injurious behaviors he had engaged in to get out of those jackets while living in an institution. An older woman who had lived in the community for over 20 years following a lifetime of institutionalization in a psychiatric hospital shared her terror when faced with the echoing sounds in the large common female washroom at Simpson Hall. The daily and often hourly pleas of each of the residents at Simpson Hall to get this strike over, to go back home, to have my things be in a quiet place, have my privacy, to see my cats, take my regular routes to work, get my freedom back, see my people. I know you guys are doing your best, but I want to go home. In conclusion, it is clear that this labor disruption and the resulting contingency plan is violating the human rights of our residents, many of whom are unable to comprehend what is happening, while others repeatedly express fear of what their future may hold if this cannot be resolved. And Mr. Speaker, I know it's easy in this House for us to lose patience and to lose our concentration, but I believe that those words spoken by the Nova Scotians who were affected by that strike are important to have voiced, Mr. Speaker, here tonight. They cannot say those words themselves. We say them on their behalf.
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you. The page stood there for almost 10 minutes waiting for that to be tabled, and now it's finally done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know my honourable colleague wants me to go home as he was begging earlier, but Mr. Speaker, I believe that I have the right to make my concerns known here this evening, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to continue. Thank you. And Mr. Speaker, many others have to be involved as well. During the summer of 2006, when I first became Community Services Minister, many staff within the department were dealing with the threat of a strike at Highland Community Residential Services Society in northern Nova Scotia. And while it was a difficult time, the strike did not occur and the residents remained in their homes. And we were fortunate, Mr. Speaker, for that. Because of the high level of service and round-the-clock care, contingency planning for residential homes is extremely complex. Contingency plans must be in place by the time a strike vote is taken. This requires searches for replacement staff, searches for appropriate facilities anywhere in the province for residents, asking families, sometimes elderly parents, to provide 24-hour care for their disabled adult children, separating residents from the workers who care for them daily, relying on strangers to ensure medications are correctly administered, living with uncertainty far from those you call family and friend. And Mr. Speaker, I would urge all members of this House to take a minute and think about that. Now, Mr. Speaker, can I ask again, what's wrong with interest arbitration and binding mediation? Mr. Speaker, this bill can ensure that the hardship suffered by our most vulnerable citizens does not happen again. Mr. Speaker, we are a compassionate society. Let's show our compassion for the well-being of the people of this province who cannot look after themselves, who cannot speak here this evening, Mr. Speaker, by passing this bill and guaranteeing fairness for everyone, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable the Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Debating. We're not allowed debating our own bill.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker,
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Minister has the floor.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would think, Mr. Speaker, that honourable members of the House would be interested in hearing from a member of the House who spent 2.5 years as the health minister of this province, Mr. Speaker. I would think that it would be reasonable on their part to feel that that my experiences might be of some value to this debate, Mr. Speaker, and for them to suggest, Mr. Speaker, that I should not participate in this debate is indicative, Mr. Speaker, of where they are in this position, because they do not want to hear from experience in terms of what strikes do to the patients and the people of this province who want the care of the healthcare system. Well, Mr. Speaker, when you've had the experiences I have, Mr. Speaker, and you have lived the experiences I have, you don't need a script to know the heart-wrenching situation that goes on, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, the one benefit of a script is that you can stay within your time limit, and I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, that I will not have that benefit this evening. But I want to say, Mr. Speaker, I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that the real issue for this legislation and the real issue for the people of this province is the extent to which the healthcare system is integrated and the extent to which any disruption of services brought on by a labor dispute generates a lack of service to individuals, but even more significant than that is the threat of a strike and the fear that that threatened disruption brings to the people of this province and their loved ones. Mr. Speaker, I lived through various pending labor disputes as the health minister of this province. Mr. Speaker, I experienced firsthand from hearing from Nova Scotians about the fear that they had. I heard from patients, I heard from residents of nursing homes, I heard from family members of those residents of nursing homes, Mr. Speaker. I heard from family members who lived outside of the province who were unable to come to the assistance of their relatives in nursing homes should a strike have occurred in the province, Mr. Speaker. And the fear, the uncertainty of those individuals, Mr. Speaker, is something I will never, ever forget as long as I live, because they believed that there was a system that would look after their loved ones, Mr. Speaker. The residents of the nursing homes believed that their home was secure. Mr. Speaker, I'll never forget visiting my mother at age 90, a resident of a nursing home in this province, Mr. Speaker, that had taken a strike vote. And I'll never forget, Mr. Speaker, going in and chatting with my mother, and she looked at me and she said to me, "What will become of me? What will become of me?" Fortunately, Mr. Speaker, I was able to reassure my mother that she could come to my home. She could come to my sister's home. Mr. Speaker, other residents of my mother's nursing home did not have that option. The fear that my mother expressed was a fear that the other residents of that nursing home lived, Mr. Speaker. They lived that fear daily until the point of resolution of that dispute. Mr. Speaker, that's what this legislation is about. This legislation is about removing the fear. It is about allowing people who call home their nursing home or their residential care home. It's about ensuring that they have the security they need to live their lives in peace and comfort. Think, Mr. Speaker, at age 90. Think at age 90. And you're in your home, and all of a sudden, the laws of this province allow your life to be disrupted, would force you to be taken from your home, Mr. Speaker, and moved to a strange facility, moved with people you don't know. Think of that, Mr. Speaker, people at age 90 of being faced with that prospect. Mr. Speaker, that's what this legislation is about. It's about making sure that those citizens who have given so much to this province, those citizens who have raised families, those citizens who have endured ample hardships in their lifetimes, are able to live the rest of their lives without fear. Without fear. Mr. Speaker, that's one sector, that's one segment of the population that would feel a sense of security as a result of this legislation being passed, Mr. Speaker. The seniors who live in our nursing homes in this province, Mr. Speaker. Now, the family members, Mr. Speaker, the family members also lived with that fear, because the mail that I received from them was mail that spoke to their fear and their inability. I want, Mr. Speaker, also to remember with members of the House the reactions that we would receive from the other side of the House during periods of pending labor disruptions, Mr. Speaker. The questions that would come to the health minister: what are you going to do to make sure that these people are not disrupted? That, Mr. Speaker, is what came from the other side of the House. Today, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Labor has presented to them the solution as to what should be done in order to ensure that those people do not have that disruption, Mr. Speaker. Oh, I understand one of the honourable members would like to make an introduction.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the honourable member from Timberley Prospect on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the honourable member opposite because I am listening carefully to his comments during this important debate. In your gallery, Mr. Speaker, we have 16 young men from the Hatchet Lake community on the Prospect Road, and their leaders are with them. And I would ask them to stand and receive the welcome of our legislature.
Thank you. The Honourable the Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to join with the honourable member in welcoming our guests this evening, and surely they represent the future of this province, and my hat's off to the leaders who work with these young people. I've spent some time in that capacity myself, and I know that it is extremely important. Well, Mr. Speaker, we can speak about the nursing homes of this province, the residential care facilities, but we've had the experience of strikes and potential strikes as they affect those who need care of our healthcare delivery system in this province, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I take great exception to the Leader of the Opposition suggesting that somebody with 2.5 years experience as a health minister in this province would be accused of filibustering a bill when he can speak from experience that he has not had, and I doubt that he ever will have. You know, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to go somewhere where I hadn't planned to go now, Mr. Speaker, because I want, Mr. Speaker, I want to address something that the other side failed to address. The Minister of Labour, Mr. Speaker, in second reading of this bill in his very eloquent speech, made reference to J.S. Woodsworth and what he had to say about strikes, Mr. Speaker, as a dispute resolution mechanism. And Mr. Speaker, the opposite side, both the member for Halifax Needham was dismissive and suggested that the Minister of Labour had taken Mr. Woodsworth out of context, Mr. Speaker, suggesting that he wasn't in fact speaking about the dispute settlement mechanism of strikes, Mr. Speaker. And then the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Speaker, he made reference to the collected works he has of J.S. Woodsworth. He made reference to the pictures he had and the speeches and what he's read of J.S. Woodsworth, but he did not address what Mr. Woodsworth said about strikes, Mr. Speaker. And to refresh the memory of the House, I will not read the whole quote, but I will read one line and what Mr. Woodsworth had to say. And he said of strikes, as the only effective means of enforcing their demands, they may resort to a strike. But the honourable member for Needham referenced that it was out of context and not to do with strikes. It has everything to do with strikes, Mr. Speaker. And he went on to say, Mr. Speaker, surely a stupidly wasteful method entailing great inconvenience to the public, disorganization to the industry, and hardship to the men, the context in which it was written at that time, lose all around. And all this might often be saved by a joint agreement by which the interests alike of the employer, the worker, and the public could be conserved. That, Mr. Speaker, is what Mr. Woodsworth said, and he said it about strikes, Mr. Speaker. Totally in context of what we are. So, Mr. Speaker, I noticed that the Leader of the Opposition took great care to avoid the quote provided by the Minister of Labour, Mr. Speaker, in his remarks to the House, because he knows, as a student of Mr. Woodsworth, he knows full well the context in which that quote was taken. And that's why he avoided it, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to go back to the difficulties that are encountered by pending labor disputes, Mr. Speaker. And the recent experience that we've had in this province was one which resulted in many, many cancellations. It resulted in people having to be sent home from hospitals. It resulted in people's surgeries being postponed to a significant period of time. It resulted in people's fear level increasing because they did not know what would occur or what would happen to them as a result of a pending labor dispute, Mr. Speaker. What this legislation would do, Mr. Speaker, is provide those people, those citizens of Nova Scotia who deserve in their time of health need, who deserve to be able to approach their illness without distraction, without fear, without having to feel that they may not get treated in time. That, Mr. Speaker, is what this legislation is intended to do, is to remove that fear from those citizens who need to have that fear removed so that they can focus on their health needs. That, Mr. Speaker, is at the heart of this legislation. Now, Mr. Speaker, well, that's too bad because I got a lot more here I want to deal with.
Just getting warmed up. Just getting warmed up. Clear your throat. Just clear.
Well, it's.
I'm ready.
The former Minister of Health looks in pretty good health to me, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure when his time comes he'll be able to address this bill with equal experience, probably more experience than I have, and force, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, I was taken by the comments by the leader of the Liberal Party this evening, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that I quote him correctly, he says, "There's not a single person that wants a strike. They want to sit down and resolve issues." Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about here is the collective bargaining process, Mr. Speaker. And the collective bargaining process is one that takes us through various stages in reaching agreements. And as been pointed out by members on the other side of the House, most collective bargaining agreements reach resolution without there having to be any strike, any threat of a strike, any lockout, or any threat of a lockout. Thankfully, most of them are resolved that way. But in this sector, Mr. Speaker, in the healthcare sector, the threat of a strike is very, very significant to those who are dependent upon the system to provide them with the services they need to be healed. That, Mr. Speaker, is the crux of what this legislation is all about. It is about ensuring that service will be provided. Now, Mr. Speaker, members opposite talk about shortcomings, and there are shortcomings, Mr. Speaker, not just here in Nova Scotia, right across the country. But this surely is about minimizing any source of disruption in the healthcare process, Mr. Speaker, of ensuring that our citizens will be able to receive the care they need when they need it, Mr. Speaker, and not fear about having that interrupted. Now, you know, Mr. Speaker, we hear a great deal in this House about the interruption of services. What we're asking the legislature of this province to do, what we're asking the elected representatives of the people of this province to do, is to remove one impediment to the continued delivery of health care in this province, Mr. Speaker. That's what this legislation is about. And it does not take away collective bargaining, Mr. Speaker. It replaces the strike as a tool of resolving the collective bargaining dispute with another mechanism, either interest arbitration or compulsory conciliation. That, Mr. Speaker, is what would be there in the event that parties are unable to come to a conclusion and to an agreement on their negotiations. That, Mr. Speaker, is what this legislation is all about. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that as we consider this legislation and we debate it, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we're doing, is having a debate, Mr. Speaker. It's not often that we on this side of the House are accused of speaking longer than people on the other side of the House. It's usually the other way around. But, Mr. Speaker, I go back to my experiences as the Minister of Health of this province, and I go back to the fear that existed in patients, the fear that residents of nursing homes had about potential disruptions. I go back to the fear that family members had, Mr. Speaker. Surely we can agree to a system that looks after the interests of the worker, but also, in this very important field of healthcare, looks after the interests of the patient, of the residents of our nursing homes in this province. Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection wants to participate in this debate. And, Mr. Speaker, there's much more I would like to say about my experiences as Health Minister, but I will yield the floor to him so he can speak on it.
Thank you. On a point of order, the Honourable
Thank
the Leader
you,
of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The minister quoted at length from J.S. Wordsworth's book. I wonder, I know I've certainly had an opportunity to canvass that book, but perhaps he would make available the appropriate references and table them so the House can have them. Yeah.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable the Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a book that came from the Legislative Library. The quote that I referenced will be found on page 53. It's the bottom, the only effective means of enforcing their demands that they may resort to a strike. And on page 54, Mr. Speaker, it says, surely a stupidly wasteful method. They know what the rest of the quote is, Mr. Speaker, but surely a stupidly wasteful method. That, Mr. Speaker. And since it's part of the Legislative Library, I don't think I really have to. I'll return the book.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the Honourable the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to take a few minutes of the host's time here this evening to talk about this piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection, one of the things that I have as a goal, and we have as a goal as a department, is to help make Nova Scotia the healthiest and safest province in the country. And members in this House would recall me saying that over and over again as I give speeches, both in this House and outside of the House. Some of the tools that we use to help make Nova Scotia the healthiest and safest province in the country are a variety of strategies that we have adopted in this province, Mr. Speaker, including our strategy on active kids, healthy kids, a framework for action, youth sexual health. Mr. Speaker, our newest one is the alcohol strategy. The list goes on and on and on, and we have a number of these strategies that we have used as a department, Mr. Speaker, to help us make Nova Scotia the healthiest and safest province in the country. But with these strategies and the effectiveness of them, that I know and we know that there will be times, even with all this good work that we're doing, that Nova Scotians will need a healthcare system. They will need to use that system. Mr. Speaker, I sat very patiently and listened to all members debate this bill so far. I've learned some very interesting things, and I've done quite a bit of research on my own, Mr. Speaker, with respect to this bill. One of the interesting things, though, that I've learned while sitting here and doing the research was that 97% of all health care agreements are settled without strike. And that's a good thing, Mr. Speaker. But what I would say to members opposite and to all Nova Scotians is, what about the other 3%? What about the times when, Mr. Speaker, when that system is not there to protect Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker? 3% may not be important to some, but it's important to members of this House on this side, that's for sure, Mr. Speaker. The other thing that I've discovered as a result of discussions, I've had a number of residents who've raised concerns about this bill and a number of residents who have expressed their support of this bill. And one of the tools that I've used, Mr. Speaker, to help my constituents better understand this bill is the Department of Environment and Labour's website, where the Minister of Environment and Labour has used and I believe groundbreaking for the province of Nova Scotia, the webcast approach, where he's gone on the internet, provided plain language response in a live broadcast. 1 minute. In a live broadcast, Mr. Speaker, to Nova Scotians, the answers to questions that they had. There's a section of that website, and you can find it very easily by going on the government website and clicking on the left-hand side. There's a picture of the Minister of Environment and Labour, and it'll give you the plain language answers to questions that real Nova Scotians have had, Mr. Speaker, with the Minister of Environment providing those answers. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of things that I want to talk about today. It's obvious that I'm not going to have the time.
Order, please. With the lateness of the debate, could I ask the Honourable the Minister to adjourn debate on Bill number 1, please?
I adjourn debate on Bill number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That concludes the government's business for today. For the hours for tomorrow will be from 9 a.m. to 12 noon. Following the daily routine, we will go to public bills for second reading and bill number 63. I move adjournment.
Bill. Thank you. The motion for adjournment has been called. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Against? Motion carried. The House will rise to sit again tomorrow at 9 a.m. The House stands adjourned.